Saved my life and now I see something new. Don't let me run from you. You gave me everything. I know your love is true. Yeah, you're my resting place. I cannot leave your warm embrace. Healing my broken faith. You show me that there's a way. Jesus, my God, my King, forever. My God, my Lord, I'm yours forever. Jesus, my God, my King, forever. My God, my Lord, I'm yours forever. Jesus, my God, my King, forever. My God, my Lord, I'm yours forever. Jesus, my God, my King, forever. My God, my Lord, I'm yours forever.
Tell them not only that you're pro-life, but why you're pro-life. And that may involve some honesty.
But in addition, maybe you know this, that she's also a great symbol of the life movement, because in her womb is Christ the Lord, the Redeemer of the world.
The youth can change the world. They're our new generation. So I think that's what sticks out to me is when I see a lot of young people participating in events like this.
Good evening and welcome to the 2020 Choices Matter Conference. My name is Jennifer Ruggiero and I serve as the Director of the Office of Human Life and Dignity for the Diocese of Metuchen. This is our 19th annual conference and we're so happy to have it virtually this year. As you know, with the pandemic, we have to be creative. This is the fourth presentation in a series of 5 over the month of October, which is Respect Life Month. If you've missed any of our presentations, they're available on our website, www.diometuchen.org/choices matter. Also, we've enjoyed over the last several weeks of our presentations, we've enjoyed lively conversation and positive and great feedback during the presentation. So I invite you to put your comments into the chat so we can hear from you and we can have a good exchange. At this time, I'd like to do a special shout out to our sponsors who have made this wonderful series possible. Each session, we've featured Break Ministry, who uses their praise and worship music as our opening prayer. Let us pray. I'd like to thank Break Ministry for their beautiful music and their contribution to this conference. Also like to thank Bishop Checchio for all of his past support of our pro-life efforts throughout the diocese. In addition, I'd like to have a special thank you to Jerry Witkowski and Tara Smith, our communications team, who have put this program together. Thank you, guys. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. As you may know, last August 2019, the Medical Aid in Dying bill passed in New Jersey and was signed into law by Governor Murphy, which legalized assisted suicide in our state. If you're an adult resident with 6 months or less to live, you're able to get a prescription to commit suicide. And so we've fought this bill for over 9 years. And our guest speaker is Kristen Hanson. And I had the opportunity to meet her and her husband, JJ, and work with her in the State House on several occasions before the Assembly Committee to oppose this legislation. Kristen has a very powerful witness story, and she's going to also talk to you about the dangers of this legislation. Let's give a warm welcome to Kristen Hanson.
Thank you for inviting me to speak about the dangers of assisted suicide. My name is Kristen Hanson, and I'd like to start out by sharing my family's story. First, I'd like to show 2 videos that explain how I became involved in the issue.
My family has had a motto someone would complain about. I can't go out to school today because I'm sick. And my dad's response would be, you can't hurt steel. I was very active growing up, did a lot of sports, played football. My family has a long line of military service, specifically the Marine Corps. While I was in the Marine Corps, I got married to my wife, Chris.
Life couldn't have been more perfect. We had just had James. He was 1 year old. We had moved to Florida. JJ had a job that he absolutely loved.
We were living what people would consider as the American dream. May of 2014, I started to feel what felt like a very deep anxiety attack. And I knew something was wrong with me because it just kept getting worse. And at that point, my ability to speak began to go away.
My phone rang, and I saw it was JJ's number on my caller ID. And I answered it, and a woman's voice was on the phone. She was a paramedic. She was with JJ. He had had a grand mal seizure.
They started doing tests. They weren't going to do an MRI initially. However, my wife, Chris, pushed them very heavily to do an MRI.
The neurologist came back in and looked at us, and I'll never forget the look on his face when he told us, you have 2 lesions in your left temporal lobe.
Grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme, which is one of the, if not the deadliest form of brain cancer that exists. The neurosurgeon who conducted the biopsy said that the cancer was inoperable. You have 4 months to live. In a best case scenario, you may get a year.
And that was it. He walked away.
When a week before that, you were running, you were having fun, you were hanging out with your kid and your wife, you were working, and everything seemed fine. And all of a sudden, a man comes in and says, you're gonna die. You don't just accept it because someone said it. We had one doctor that told us that, go home, enjoy the time you have left. And yet another doctor said, we got this, no problem, we'll get it out.
He had the surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and he had an amazing neurosurgeon. They monitored to see if he was having seizures that we just couldn't see. Over the next 24 hours, he had 9 more seizures. So by the time that was done, he couldn't talk at all.
Would this be easier if I just gave up? If I just said, this is too much of a burden on my family, the pain is difficult, I don't want to deal with this. What if I just said I had enough and ended it? I would be okay the next day because I would be gone. I wouldn't feel the pain. I wouldn't feel the emotion. They do. My wife would feel it for the rest of her life. My son would not have one more day to spend with me.
No matter how bad those days were, we had to fight for James. James makes us stronger.
I still have cancer today. I still have active cancer cells. I'm still on chemo. And I have people say all the time, you don't look like it. You don't look like you have active cancer. It's because every single part of my day I spend towards improving my ability to live. I followed the Brittany Maynard case. To a certain extent, I could identify with what she was dealing with. Same disease, roughly the same age, both had families, but I don't agree with what she chose to do. You can't unmake that choice. Once you do it, it's done. Unless a cure is found, the disease will come back. When and how, I don't know. My hope and my fight is to keep it at bay for as long as possible.
I'd say my biggest fear with assisted suicide is that a patient will go to a doctor who already views them as a terminal patient and sees little hope for anything else, any other treatment options, any other outcomes other than death.
Chris has saved my life. And she did that while being a mother, while paying the bills. I didn't have to ask for it. I didn't have to need it. She did it because she loved me. And she's my best friend. And I couldn't imagine being with anybody else besides her.
You are more my hero now than I ever thought possible. And I love you, and you're my best friend.
Every single day is a gift. And you can't let that go.
I'd like to share one more video. And this is called JJ's Final Days. He looks at the world and he wants to make it a better place. He said, Chris, we got to share this to help other people. They need to know that it's okay for this to happen. And don't be afraid. I started tearing up and I said, only you, James Joseph Hanson, are worried about other people in this moment. He only has about 4 weeks left to live.
Yeah.
And that was a week ago. The end of September, he got depressed and there was no hope at this point.
I was done. Done. But now, we're gonna keep going.
It's been hard to advocate for JJ. I'm his healthcare proxy. He chose me because I think he knew that I would think, what would JJ want? And I would ultimately fight for him, but I would also let him go. All we can do is today, right?
Yeah.
And we can make today the best we possibly can. We had 3.5 years now when they first only gave you 4 months.
We are in love with each other. No worries.
Always and forever. Try to hold on to hope. For yourself, for those around you, for people you don't even know. And it could be changing their life and you don't even know. You can't think about assisted suicide in one situation. You have to step back and think about who it could hurt because it puts so many people at risk. And that is the danger with assisted suicide. You'll never know. If you make that choice, if you do that, you might have lived like JJ. He had 3.5 good years, so many beautiful moments we've shared as a family. James has gotten to know his daddy. He knows who his daddy is now. We have Lucas. The joys that we have been able to experience in these 3.5 years are too many to count. And when I stop for a moment to think of if we had listened, if we had given up hope, we would have missed out on so much. Lucas requires so much care and love right now. He's dependent on me for everything. And I do it with joy. I take care of him with joy. And why is that so different at the end of life? Every moment we can share together is a gift. I'm sorry, it's hard to watch the videos without getting emotional. And on the surface, our family's story is undeniably tragic, but our journey is also one of hope that's been filled with so many miracles, big and small. It's allowed us to smile amidst the sorrow and the suffering. When I look back, I'm filled with overwhelming gratitude for all that happened in the 3.5 years we had with JJ after his diagnosis. There are so many moments where it's clear that if something had gone differently, we may not have had that time together, and that would have been even more tragic. May 13th, 2014. It was a day that started out like any other and changed our lives in an instant. When I arrived at the ER, the nurse told me that they would be discharging JJ soon. All the standard tests they'd run looked normal. Blood tests, CAT scan. And I wanted desperately to believe what she said, that JJ was okay. But something inside me kept saying that there was more. I asked, wasn't it possible that the CAT scan had missed something? What about an MRI? I insisted that we didn't want to leave until they did one. They ended up doing one that evening, and the next morning the neurologist came in to see JJ. He tested his reflexes and asked him some questions, and after about 5 minutes, he said, well, 50% of people have a seizure and never have one again, so I'm going to send JJ home without any seizure medications, and let's just hope he doesn't have another one. I was nervous to question the doctor, but I knew that I had to ask about the MRI results. I was shocked when he said he hadn't realized that they'd done one and he needed to go check the results. About 15 minutes later, when he returned, he wore a somber expression, and he shared the news that JJ had 2 lesions in his left temporal lobe of his brain. We would have to do a biopsy to see if it was an infection or if it was cancer. What would have happened if I hadn't persisted? If I hadn't trusted my intuition and listened to that little voice guiding me? What if I had let them send JJ home? I'll never know for certain, but I do know that in that moment, I realized I had to fight for JJ. I had to learn as much as I could about his condition and become his fearless advocate. If JJ's cancer had gone undetected and they sent him home, it would have grown. The biopsy revealed that it was cancer. It was the most aggressive brain cancer that there is. And the neurosurgeon said that the tumors were already inoperable because they were located on JJ's speech center. If they operated, the chance was too great that he would lose his ability to speak and understand language. JJ had glioblastoma multiforme, the most aggressive form of brain cancer. It can double in size every 2 weeks. I was told JJ likely only had 4 months to live. Maybe if we were lucky, we could get a year. If it had been a less aggressive tumor, maybe we could have gotten 3 years. But JJ's cancer was the most aggressive kind there was. In that moment, time stood still. I couldn't breathe. Everything went silent except for the pounding of my heart and the sound of my voice in my head crying out
Why? Why us? Why only 4 months? Why can't we have 3 years? 3 years in that moment felt like an eternity. Although everything the doctors were telling us sent a message of hopelessness, I knew that we had to hold on to hope. We had to fight for James. He was only 1. He needed to have as much time as he could with JJ. The one thing that we didn't have, though, was time, because of how aggressive JJ's cancer was. And every major brain cancer center we called said it would be at least 2 weeks before we could get another consultation. We reached out to family and friends to share the news of JJ's diagnosis. And as fate would have it, one friend we called happened to be out with another group of friends, and he shared JJ's story with them. One of the men there just so happened to be the chief of anesthesiology at the Moffitt Cancer Center, the best research cancer center in the Southeast, right in Tampa, where we were living at the time. It was the same place that we had called and been told that it would be at least 2 weeks to get an appointment. But this doctor was next door neighbors with the chief of neurosurgery there. He would ask if they could get JJ in sooner. Sure enough, by that evening, we got a call saying that we had an appointment the next day with the chief of neurosurgery at the Moffitt Center. I can't begin to explain how much hope that gave us. When we went, we were told that they could operate, but that they would have to do a wake surgery where they'd ask JJ questions to see what they could safely remove without permanently damaging too much of his cognitive functioning. But awake surgery is very dangerous, and we were told that the recovery would be difficult. So we wanted to get a second opinion from Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City, where we'll be closer to JJ's family. JJ had worked in New York State politics, so he called everyone he knew that might be able to get him into Sloan. He called legislators, the governor's office, congressmen, assemblymen, but they all came back with the same answer. We're sorry, but it's going to take 2 weeks until you can get in. The neurosurgeon at Moffitt was very clear. There is no more time. So we scheduled the surgery at Moffitt for the following week, and we flew to New York in the hopes that by some miracle we would get an appointment. If we had no luck, we would fly back to Florida over the weekend. As we were waiting in the Tampa airport, about to board the plane, we received a phone call from a family friend. JJ's dad had called him to share the news, to which Vinny, his longtime fishing buddy and very Italian friend, replied, "I got a guy, I'll call Doc." We didn't know it at the time, but Doc just so happened to be the chief of immunotherapy at Memorial Sloan Kettering, who has a second home in our small town in upstate New York. Vinny is a carpenter, and he had done work for Doc. To our amazement, Vinny was calling to tell us while we were at the airport that the doctor had gotten JJ in with the chief of neurosurgery at Sloan. We had to be in New York City at 8 a.m. the next morning. Back-to-back appointments with the chiefs of neurosurgery at 2 of the leading brain cancer research hospitals in the United States. It was such a miracle. The neurosurgeon's response at Memorial Sloan Kettering was, when he saw JJ's scans, was, "We've got this. We do 3 of these a day. It's our bread and butter." And he said that they could do the surgery with JJ asleep. He felt they had a safe route of entry and it would be much safer than Moffitt's awake surgery. So we scheduled the surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering for the next week on May 29th, which just so happened to be JJ and our 9-year wedding anniversary. The neurosurgeon removed the 2 tumors, and JJ seemed to be recovering well initially, but on the second day, his speech and comprehension started to decline. By the 4th day in the hospital, he didn't even understand how to answer when they asked him his name. My heart broke as I saw the look in the doctor's eyes change. I was told that they would give him one more day in the hospital, but if nothing changed, they'd have to send him home and see what happened. But I refused to give up hope. There had to be something they were missing. JJ needed me to believe. He needed me to fight for him. I finally convinced the doctors to do an EEG to monitor for seizures. I hoped that he was having subclinical seizures that we just couldn't see, and it turned out that he was. By that evening, JJ had his first visible seizure. He ended up having 9 seizures over the next 24 hours. Those were some of the most frightening days of my life. JJ had a difficult recovery, and the reality was that his prognosis was still very grim. JJ had surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. But even with all of that, the doctors told us that his cancer almost always comes back. 70% of patients die within the first year, and less than 2% of those with glioblastoma make it to 5 years. One thing that patients need more than anything is hope. So we did everything we could to help give JJ the best chance at survival. We enrolled him in a clinical trial, and thankfully JJ went into remission for almost 2 years. A few months after JJ's diagnosis, Brittany Maynard's story was starting to make headlines across the country. Some of you may remember Brittany. She was a beautiful young woman, around the same age as JJ, suffering from the same exact cancer, but she famously decided to move to Oregon to end her own life through assisted suicide and to advocate for its legislation in her home state of California. I remember when we first saw her on TV, we could see so clearly how her story was being glamorized to perpetuate a message of hopelessness. And JJ knew how dangerous that was for other patients like him. So JJ, not being one to sit on the sidelines, started reaching out to friends to see how he could become involved to help spread a message of hope to other patients. Eventually, JJ connected with the Patients' Rights Action Fund. And a few weeks later, Prof came to capture our story on that first video you saw. A few months after that, when JJ was off all treatments and in remission, he was asked to take over as the president of the Patients' Rights Action Fund, leading the national fight against the legalization of assisted suicide. The next year was one of the happiest of our lives. JJ was healthier than we could have ever imagined. He loved his new job, and we could see clearly the purpose in his diagnosis. His story had a dramatic impact on slowing down assisted suicide legislation that was threatening to sweep the country after Brittany's story made headlines. It was during that time that we allowed ourselves to dream of the possibility of having more children. But in late October of 2016, after a year of trying to conceive, we found out that JJ's cancer was back. The following few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, tests, and more research to see if there were any other promising treatments we could try. We finally settled on a new experimental immunotherapy treatment, but we had to sign paperwork saying that we wouldn't get pregnant. It was too risky. They didn't know if it would cause birth defects. My heart broke as we signed those documents, but we knew we had to do it. In early November, right after JJ started the new treatment, we found out we were pregnant. By a miracle, we had gotten pregnant right before JJ had started the trial. In July of 2017, we welcomed our little miracle baby into the world. Shortly after Lucas was born, JJ's health started to decline, and we found out that the treatments were no longer working. So we did everything we could to try to enjoy the time that we had left together, with the knowledge that every day truly is a gift. In those final years, when JJ knew his time was limited, he chose to fight against the ableism in our medical system, which has perhaps its most deadly expression in assisted suicide policy. Having a life-limiting disability himself, he realized that the disability community's concerns with assisted suicide were warranted. So one of the last things JJ asked of me was to promise that after his death, I would continue sharing our family's story to protect the vulnerable against the threat of legalized assisted suicide. Assisted suicide legislation is dangerous public policy, and there are many fatal flaws. But I know that time is limited, so I'm going to highlight just a few. Doctors make mistakes. Insurance companies deny care and offer a cheap death instead. Pain is not the reason patients end their lives by assisted suicide. It is a deadly form of discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and mental health conditions all too often are ignored, and patients struggling with depression receive the medications anyway. Doctors make mistakes. As JJ's story so clearly illustrates, it is so difficult to prognosticate 6 months out how much time you have left to live. JJ's doctors had initially only given him 4 months to live, and he ended up having 3.5 good years beyond that. And he's not the only one. I've met so many other glioblastoma patients who have outlived their prognosis, just like JJ's, going now 5, 10, 15 years out. Similar to Jeanette Hall, who also advocates against assisted suicide. She was told that she was terminal and only had months to live, and she actually wanted assisted suicide. She became depressed, and thankfully, she had a long-standing relationship with her doctor who convinced her to try treatment. And here she is 20 years later, still living, and JJ had the chance to meet her. She said if her doctor had believed in assisted suicide, she would be dead. There's a story of Maya Dorian in Canada, a poor woman who was diagnosed with a terminal illness who tried to commit suicide by jumping off a boat into the frigid waters once she realized that she was dying, only to survive and then later find out that her doctors had been wrong and she wasn't dying at all. Insurance companies deny treatment. There are stories from Oregon when assisted suicide was first legalized, where the Oregon Health Plan sent out letters to patients, including Randy Stroop and Barbara Wagner, denying them the treatments that their doctors were requesting for them, and instead offering assisted suicide. These stories are available to view on YouTube. And more recently, there's the story of Dr. Brian Callister. I'd like to share his story with you in this short video.
I chose to become a physician because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. Recently, I had 2 different patients, and both needed life-saving procedures. When requesting a transfer to a center in their home states, one's in California, one's in Oregon, the insurance medical directors I spoke with said they would not cover the life-saving procedure that we'd requested. But hey, by the way, have you considered assisted suicide? Quite frankly, I was stunned. This is something we didn't talk about, we didn't request, we didn't ask for. As much as most insurance companies try to come across as your best friend, they want to do whatever the least costly thing is. It's a lot cheaper to grab a couple drugs and kill you than it is to provide you life-sustaining therapy. Simple as that.
Pain is not the main reason why patients request assisted suicide. This is straight from the Oregon report on assisted suicide, where they indicate the reasons patients are giving for going through with ending their lives through assisted suicide. And as you can see, in 2019, and over here for the total years that cumulative data that assisted suicide has been legal in Oregon, pain control, inadequate pain control, or even concern about it never makes it into the top 5 reasons. The top 5 reasons are all existential suffering or disability-related reasons. Less able to engage in activities that make life enjoyable, losing autonomy, losing dignity, fear of being a burden on family and friends. Almost was 60% of patients in 2019. Almost 60% of patients cited that as a reason. These are very, very important issues at end of life that we need to address, but they're not reasons to abandon patients. Disability discrimination. Assisted suicide sets up a 2-tiered system where some people get suicide prevention and the standard of care, and others, namely those with life-threatening disabilities, get suicide assistance and healthcare rationing. This insidious form of ableism results in death to the devalued group, and nothing can be more discriminatory. That's why some of the major national disability rights organizations that have taken a position, almost all of them oppose assisted suicide. And here's a list of some of the major organizations that have taken a position and are opposed. This is from the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And then recently, the National Council on Disability, an independent secular organization, released a report highlighting the dangers of assisted suicide and why they are particularly dangerous for individuals with disabilities. As I mentioned earlier, JJ was president of the Patients' Rights Action Fund, and as part of my promise to JJ, I joined the Patients' Rights Action Fund in 2018 after his death and became their community relations advocate. I wanted to share our website with you. We have many resources on our website available to you, including the videos that I showed you earlier. We also have an advanced directive that was created for California. It's free and downloadable, and we are hoping in the future to be able to create similar advanced directives in each of the states where assisted suicide is legal to protect patients from the threat of assisted suicide at the end of their life so that they can be clear of their wishes to their family and friends. I just want to, again, emphasize it is important for everyone to have an advanced directive, and whether you use ours or others that are available to you, or you go out and get your own, just make sure that you have those very, very difficult conversations with your loved ones and whoever you are going to ask to help make sure that your wishes are fulfilled at the end of your life. I know that those conversations can be hard to have, but having gone through what we went through at such a young age, it's important for everyone to have those conversations. So just to close, what makes life here on Earth so valuable is that it doesn't last forever. What makes it precious is that it ends. We couldn't save JJ's life, but we can continue to share his story and help to save other lives. We can advocate for better access to truly compassionate, multidisciplinary care at the end of life for everyone, not just a privileged few. We can be warriors of hope in an all too often hopeless world. Thank you.
my daily bread. Your every word spoken to me enough, and I'm lost without you. And I'm desperate for you. Oh God, I am. And I'm lost without you. And I'm desperate for you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your every word spoken to me. Daily bread. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your every word spoken to me, and I'm lost without you. And I'm desperate for you. And I'm lost without you. And I'm desperate for you.
Thank you, Kristen, for that really powerful presentation. It just really is such an important message that you have. I had to have my tissues out a few times. Really powerful. Just want to make a few points. It's really important, even though this legislation is in effect in New Jersey, we need to stay very tuned into what's happening. I just read this morning that there is a report out that other states where assisted suicide is legal, the legislators are trying to expand the measure to make it more available, less waiting periods and those kinds of things. So we really need to stay tuned and continue to educate our fellow Catholics and our general public about this terrible public policy. I really enjoyed Kristen's presentation because she talked about the miracles all along the way in her journey with her husband in his final years. And I think that just is a testimony to the fact that if you have faith, you really can get through anything. And it's really important that our society is really called to care for our people that are sick and elderly and towards the end of their life. And so often our people that are facing those challenges feel like they have a duty to die. And that's what our society sometimes shouts at them, but we have a duty to care. So I think that's the message that we leave with tonight. So thank you, Kristen, for your wonderful presentation. I hope you'll join us for our final presentation, which will be Saturday, October 31st at 10 a.m. Our guest speaker will be Stephanie Gray Connors, and she will be talking about abortion, the great debate, a very timely issue as we get close to the election. And she'll have some really good information about how to be effective in communicating the pro-life message. So if you can, please join us. If you know someone else that would like to have listened to today's presentation, it is recorded and will be on our website. Thank you so much, and see you on Saturday.